Hello everybody, it's Mr. Joseph. Today we're going to do some trig graphing review. So what we have in front of us is we have a graph. We have to make an equation. So when I stare at this graph, the first thing I'm going to notice is that the maximum is at 3 and the minimum is at -7. So that means that between -7 and 3, we have 10 spaces between them. So if there's 10 spaces between them, I know that my midline has to be exactly halfway. So if it's from 3 to -7 is 10, then I know I need to go down 5. So instead of being at 3, I'm going to go down 3 and then 2. So that means that I am at -2. So that means my midline is -2, which means that my graph has shifted down by 2. So when I'm making my equation, I already know that it's going to be -2 on the outside because my graph was pushed down by 2. Next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to figure out what my altitude is. So I'm going to draw a line from my midline to my max, which is from 2 to 3. Sorry, -2 to 3. So I know that my amplitude is 5. So I know that in the front is 5. Whether or not that's flipped or not, I don't know yet. We'll discuss that next. But I know for now that my amplitude is 5. So I'm going to erase that. And now we're going to talk about whether or not periods and stuff like that. So what I told you in class is technically there's a lot of different ways to draw, to create equations based on where it starts. So I said in class that we will not have a phase shift. So that means we're starting at 0. So at 0, I'm at this point 0, 2. And then I'm going to do the graph. I'm going to keep going, and stop right there. Because when I stop right there, that is when I've completed a period. So my period for this problem is 2 pi over 3. Because that's how long it took for the pattern to start repeating itself again. But the problem is, just because your period is 2 pi over 3, in our equation, which will look either like this or like this, we got our D value already, right? So we can put a check mark beside D. We know our amplitude, but we need to find out B. So to find out B, period equals 2 pi divided by B. Our period is 2 pi over 3. I'm going to set that equal to 2 pi over B, and I'm actually going to solve for B. So right now I'm substituting 2 pi over 3 for my period because that's what it is. So I don't like B. I can actually cross multiply in this problem. And I'm going to get 2 pi B equals 6 pi. And then I'm able to divide by 2 pi. And I'm going to get B equals 3. So I know that in my formula, it will be a 3x. And that's because the B value helps determine what my period is. So we found our B value. So I told you that there's no phase shift, so actually me making all that extra space was not necessary. So let's just move everything closer to together. So we got 3x and we got -2. We just don't know if it's sine or cosine, and we don't know if our graph is reflected or not. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to pay attention to the points that I have. So I have this point, this point, this point, and this point. So when I'm looking at my x values, it's not that you have to write them out, right? But I will, just for this case. So I'm just writing my x values here. We have 2, 3, -2, sorry, -2, -7, and -2. So I want you to notice that -2, -2, -2. This reminds me of sine, actually, because when we look at sine and cosine, sine is normally 0, 1, 0, -1, 0. Cosine is normally 1, 0, -1, 0, 1. So I want you to notice that in sine, these three values tend to repeat, and then in cosine, these two values tend to repeat. So let's check it out. So we're saying that we took our 0, and I'm going to multiply it by 5, because that's my amplitude of 0. And then I subtract 2, and do you see how I get -2? I'm going to take 1, I'm going to multiply it by 5, I get 5. And then I'm going to subtract 2, and I get 3. Because this 5 and this -2, that tells us what affects our y values. And if I keep doing this, times 5 minus 2, that's -2, times 5, -5 minus 2, -7, times 5, 0 minus 2, -2. Then I can erase cosine. There's no way that cosine is right, because this matches a sine graph perfectly. These 3 points right here were not affected by the amplitude, which was 5, right? Because if you do 0 times 5, it's 0. But all these points were pushed down 2. So I know that this has to be sine, and that this is my final answer. So that's how I would approach this. Sometimes you have to pay attention to whether or not 5 is negative or not, and the graph will let you know that. Because if it was negative, then you'll see that the points would have been flipped, and this point would have been down here, and this point would have been up here. So it looks flipped. And so I just really challenge you to look at what this function looks like when it's flipped. So that's how we do that. The next question says to make the reciprocal function. So if I'm making the reciprocal function, that means that I do the same thing, but this time I'm going to write cosecant. And I know that when it's cosecant, that I'm going to have asymptotes where it's normally 0. So if you look at these 3 that I highlighted, there's going to be an asymptote, and asymptote. So an asymptote will always happen where the highlighted ones are for sine. So that's why I can just make lines going down here, right here, and right here. And the reason why that is true is because those are the x values that would give us y at 0. And so that's why we know that those are asymptotes. And all we do is draw a graph above and draw a graph below, and we're done with that. And that's all you have to do to graph a cosecant graph. So let's actually do a secant one, which is this one. So this one, just disregard this. So our amplitude is the number in front, which is a 1. And notice that I said that the amplitude is 1, not -1, or amplitude can only be positive. Our period, which is 2 pi over b, this is b. It says 2 pi over 2, which is pi. Our phase shift equals c over b. This right here is c. So we're going to do pi over 2 divided by 2, which is pi over 2 times 1/4 which is pi over y 1/4, times a half, sorry. We're doing the reciprocal of 2. I'm not sure why I said 4. So the reciprocal of 2 is a half, so that's why it's going to be 1/2. And you get pi over 4. So I'm going to write pi over 4. And then I notice that this is a subtraction sign, so I have to do the opposite of the subtraction sign, which means I need to go right. And then there's no vertical shift because we're not adding or subtracting a number. So I'm going to write my original x values for which one. So since it's a secant, I can look at a cosine graph. So this is actually what I'm going to put on my table. I'm going to make the graph for this, and then I'm going to be able to put my parabolas once I set everything up. So I'm going to have 0, pi over 2, pi, 3 pi over 2, 2 pi. And since this is cosine, I know it's 1, 0, -1, 0, 1. So we're doing a couple things to our x and our y values. Let's go ahead and take care of our y values. Let me erase all this. So the only thing that is affecting my y value is this negative sign. So I know I'm going to multiply everything by -1. So this becomes -1, 0, 1, 0, -1. And hopefully that makes sense because in order to flip, all our y values have to change. Also, I'm going to circle these 2 points, because these 2 points are where our asymptotes happen. So the cool thing about the asymptotes is the fact that you can recognize them at the beginning of the problem. So whenever your y values are 0, that is where you're going to have your asymptotes. So just keep that in mind as we go. So now we're going to do our x values. So 2 things happened. We shrunk our period from 2 pi to pi. So that means I'm going to take all my x values and multiply by a half because I have to do the reciprocal of 2. And then I'm going to go pi over 4 to the right, which means I need to add pi over 4. So I'm going to take all my x values and multiply them by a half. And I hope that you see that our period goes from 0 to pi, which is the same thing. Like our period is pi because that length is pi if you did pi minus 0. So we took all our x values and we cut them in half because our period got cut in half. And all we do now is we're going to add pi over 4 because we're shifting the whole thing to the right, pi over 4. So pi over 4 plus pi over 4 is 2 pi over 8, which is so you see, I should write that down. So I said pi over 4 plus pi over 4, which is 2 pi over 4. So 2 pi over 4 is equivalent to pi over 2. You see how I just did that right now? I saw pi over 4, pi over 4. I don't know why I added the 4s on the bottom. We know that when we add fractions, that you need to have the same denominator. You copy the denominator once, and you just add what's in the numerator. So next, I'm going to have pi over 2 plus pi over 4. So if we multiply this by 2, I hope that we see that we have 2 pi over 4 plus pi over 4, which is 3 pi over 4. Then we have 3 pi over 4 plus pi over 4, which is just 4 pi over 4, which is pi. And then we have pi plus pi over 4, which if we made this over 1 and multiplied by 4 and 4, we will have 4 pi over 4 plus pi over 4, which is 5 pi over 4. So I'm going to highlight all my new x values. So pi over 4, 2 pi over 4, 3 pi over 4, pi, and 5 pi over 4. Everything just got shifted to the right, pi over 4. So now I'm going to go over here Draw my graph. And now I got to make a decision on what I want to count by. So since I'm counting by pi over 4s, I might just make this pi over 2 and make this pi, make this 3 pi over 2, and make this 2 pi, knowing that all my inside ones are like pi over 4, 3 pi over 4, 5 pi over 4, 7 pi over 4. So we're really counting by 45s, but I just wrote down my blue ones first. So now, before I even start this problem, I've circled 2 zeros, which I'm going to highlight in pink. I circled this and this, which means that at pi and 2 pi over 4, that we're going to have asymptotes there. And remember that 2 pi over 4 simplifies to pi over 2. So I'm going to make an asymptote and an asymptote. And then I'm going to plot my points. So I have pi over 4, negative 1. I have 2 pi over 4, 0. I have 3 pi over 4, 1. I have pi, 0. And then I have 5 pi over 4, negative 1. So we can see our graphs like this. And now I can make my parabola go up. So one thing you need to notice is our graph is not complete because we only have like one parabola. So if we look at our asymptotes, we went from 2 pi over 4 to pi. So that means that we added pi over 2. Because I don't know if you know this, but 2 pi over 4 just simplifies to pi over 2. So how far away is pi over 2 from pi? Well, that's pi over 2. So I can suspect that my next one is going to happen after another 90, which is 2 pi over 2 plus pi over 2, which is 3 pi over 2. So now 3 pi over 2, I can make another asymptote. And I can take a guess that this is also going to be 0. And then I can draw my other graph going down that way. So that's all if you wanted to complete it. And that's what you have. So I hope these examples help. Have a good day.